Hello, beautiful souls. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. My name is Carolyn. This channel is all about true crime, mystery, and anything abnormal. I highly recommend subscribing because this channel is definitely a vibe. Today's story is highly requested. Today's story is about Edmund Kemper, the Coed killer. Or as I like to refer to him, the most extreme case of mommy issues. Ed Kemper was born December 18th, 1948 in Burbank, California. And he showed extremely troubling behavior from an extremely young age. His mother, Clarnell Kemper, was an alcoholic and was an extremely domineering woman. She was extremely abusive to both Ed and his father, and she was erratic and demeaning and just an absolutely horrific woman. Ed's father was a World War II veteran, and he said going through atomic bomb training was less stressful than living with Ed's mom. When Ed was older, after he had gotten caught and all of this was done, he would describe his mother as extremely emasculating. And this seemed to be kind of the core issue that bothered him the most about his mother. It is also the reason Ed's father left Ed's mother. Ed's mother refused to show any love, any care at all to Ed. She thought that if she coddled Ed, she would make Ed gay. So, I mean, there's that. Ed's disturbing behavior began almost from birth. When he was a very young boy, he used to pull the heads off of his sister's dolls. And I think, decapitating dolls is something that a lot of brothers did to tease their sisters when they were kids. I know my brother did it to my Barbie dolls when I was a kid. So I think that alone is not something necessarily that is disturbing. I think that can be something that's just normal child play and teasing your siblings. But in Ed's case, when he later talked about when he would do this, popping the heads off the dolls, he said that he was getting a sexual thrill from it. And he described it in quite a lot of detail. He would describe the sound of popping their heads off, and then he would hold the dolls up by their hair, and then he would sit the body without the head down and look at the body of the doll, and he would say this is what got him off. And this is all happening. Ed's not even in the second grade yet, so we're talking extremely young child. Ed would also force his sister to play two games that he loved to play. One was called Gas Chamber and one was called Electric Chair. And what he would do is he would get his sisters to pretend that they were walking him towards a gas chamber or walking him towards an electric chair, and then he would act out dying either from an electric chair, so I guess like flipping around, I don't know, or, in a gas chamber pretending, he was suffocating. And these were his two favorite games to play. And he would force his sisters to play them. The girls didn't want to be playing these games with them. Ed began stalking his second grade teacher. And when you're in the second grade, you're about 7 years old. So he was an extremely young when he is doing these extremely bizarre, terrifying things. His sisters used to tease him and say that Ed really wanted to kiss his second grade teacher. And Ed's response was, if I kiss her, then I would have to kill her. At 7, if you're thinking that kind of shit in the second grade, We got problems. We got big problems, Eddie boy. Big problems. Then at the age of 10, what comes up in every serial killer's story of their childhood was animal abuse. The family had 2 kitties, and Ed killed both of them. One of them he buried alive, and then he dug it up and cut its head off. And he's 10. And in 1957, when Ed is 10 years old, his father leaves the family. Once the father leaves the family, Ed's mother begins making him sleep in the basement. And this was something that Ed Kemper would later go on to discuss many, many times. After he gets caught and goes to prison, he does so many interviews. He's probably done more interviews than any other serial killer. He would do interviews with any news people. He would do it with all the police. He was interviewed by the FBI. Like, he loved to do interviews and tell whoever was interviewing him all the details of everything in his life. And in all of these interviews, he described this as very traumatic, being sent into the basement to sleep at night. He was afraid, first of all, sleeping in the basement, and he also felt very demeaned by his mother that the rest of the family could sleep upstairs in bedrooms like normal people, and he was forced into the basement. When he was asked why he had to sleep in the basement, he said his mother told him he had to sleep in the basement because she was afraid that he would hurt his sisters. And the behavior that he's exhibited so far in his life, I think his mother had a very genuine fear that he would hurt his sisters. But you get him help. If you're afraid he's going to hurt his sisters, you don't lock him in the basement every night. You get him help. But his mother's, I honestly think, just as psychotic as he is, because she just locks the kid in the basement every night. And his whole childhood, she was extremely physically, emotionally, and I think most of all psychologically abusive to Ed. I mean, this is a woman who thought if she showed love to her son, it would make him gay. So we're not working with a full deck of cards here to begin with. And in my personal opinion, I think his mother hated men because she was always very demeaning because he was male. She told him constantly his whole childhood, his whole life, that no woman would ever love him. At 14, Ed decided to run away from home to get away from his mother. So he ran away and went to his dad's house. But when he showed up at his dad's house, his dad didn't want him. His dad had remarried and wanted nothing at all to do with Ed. So he sent Ed to go and live with his grandparents. His grandmother was not any better than his mother. His grandmother did the exact same things to Ed as his mother would. So he ran away to get away from his mother and just ended up at his grandparents' house going through the same type of abuse from his grandmother. There's not a lot said about his grandfather. Ed never talked much about if the grandfather was abusive in any way, but he did talk about the grandmother being very demeaning to Ed and his grandfather. Ed was later said about this time that he couldn't please anyone. No matter what he did, no one was ever pleased with anything that he did. And he said at this time, he was just a ticking time bomb of anger and he was going to go off. And go off he did. On August 27th, 1964, when Ed is 15 years old, he gets in an extremely bad argument with his grandmother. And Ed gets a gun and kills her. Ed then waits for his grandfather to get home, and then he shoots the grandfather as he's walking up the driveway towards the house. As soon as he had killed both his grandparents, he called his mother to confess what he had just done. When he was arrested and asked why he had killed his grandparents, he said that he had killed his grandmother because he wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. When any killer says that they kill someone because they want to know what it feels like, I can't think of a more terrifying response. Somehow in their brain, they have this curiosity to know what it would feel like to kill someone. And to me, that is extremely psychotic. And then he said he killed his grandfather so that his grandfather wouldn't have to know that his wife had been killed. He was then sent to a state hospital and kept in a unit for the criminally insane. And in this story, you'd think, oh, great. Okay, we've got him locked up. People are safe. Eddie Boy is going to get some help. He's going to be kept in jail. No. When Ed was at the hospital, he was diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic. He was also given an IQ test, and he was told that his IQ was 145. Now, depending on what source you read, that number changes constantly. But from all of the sources I read, the most common number that came up was 145. So what the exact number is, I don't know. But he had an extremely, extremely high IQ. If you have an IQ of 145, you are a genius. So we now have a psychopath who is a genius, and Ed is also enormous. He is 5'9" and weighs 300 pounds. He is a big boy. And even though he had killed both his grandparents, was diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic, on his 21st birthday, he was just set free. And he was set free in 1969, and he goes back to live with his mother. I cannot think of a worse place for Ed to have gone to, but that's where he went. His mother at this time was working as an administrative assistant at the University of California. Ed decided he wanted to try to live a normal life, so he decided he really wanted to become a police officer. The problem was he was too big. Apparently, I had no idea that this was even a thing, but apparently being 6'9" and 300 pounds makes you too large to be a police officer. I didn't know there was a limit, but apparently there is. I don't know if there still is a limit for that, but he was rejected simply because he was too big. And Ed was really unhappy about this because he really wanted to be a police officer. And I mean, if you're rejected because you're too big, there's nothing you can do about it. You're too big, you can't shrink, you're never going to be a cop. So he was very disappointed. So he became a truck driver in Southern California in the 1970s. And in the 1970s in California, there were lots of hitchhikers and there were lots of serial killers. When Ed would be driving, he started picking up female hitchhikers. And he said when he started picking up hitchhikers, he was picking up young girls, not with the intention of hurting them, but he had been locked up since he was 15. He's now 21, so he's never had any experience with females that are his own age, which he's obviously interested in females and wants to date females. So he would pick them up to almost try to learn how to have conversations with women. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. With Ed, it's hard to know what's true and what's not, but through a lot of his interviews, he's always consistent, and from my impression, he seems like he's telling the truth in these interviews. Ed claims he had picked up over 100 female hitchhikers without hurting anyone. He would just pick them up, chat with them, and let them go. He never hurt anyone for those first 100, but that changes. Ed says when he would see a young, pretty girl, he would think, she's pretty, I'd like to talk to her, I'd like to date her. But he would also think, I wonder what her head would look like on a stick. It's not Lord of the Flies, Eddie. We're not, no. On May 7th, 1972, Ed picked up 2 female hitchhikers. They were 2 18-year-old girls who went to Fresno State. He brought the 2 girls to a wooded area with the intention of essaying them. He said that once he got out there, he panicked and he strangled them and then stabbed both of them. Once he had killed them, he stuffed them into the trunk of his car and headed home. While he was driving with the 2 girls in his trunk, deceased, he was pulled over by a police officer for having a broken taillight. The same thing actually happened with Jeffrey Dahmer as well. He was pulled over when he had a deceased person in his car, but the police never searched the cars. And obviously the police don't search the cars. If you're pulling someone over for a broken taillight, cops aren't searching your car. What I find really strange is how both of them had the ability to stay so calm. Like, if I get pulled over by the police, I'm not even doing anything wrong and I'm like nervous. I can't imagine what it would be like if I had 2 dead bodies in my trunk. But I guess psychopaths, they don't seem to get nervous. And they have a lot of confidence and a lot of charm. So he got pulled over and let go. Once Ed got home with the 2 dead girls, he had sex with their bodies, he cut them up, and he disposed of their remains in a ravine. On September 14th, 1972, Ed picked up a 15-year-old girl. He drove her out to a wooded area, and during the altercation between the 2 of them, Ed accidentally locked himself outside of the car. So Ed was locked out of the car. The girl is in the car and the keys to the car are in the car. So she could have driven away, but Ed somehow convinced her to let him back in the car. And Ed was extremely talented at making people feel comfortable around him, putting people at ease, and convincing people that he was a great guy. Like, he somehow convinced this girl to open the door and let him back in. Once he got back in the car, he ended up choking the girl until she was unconscious, R-wording her, and then killing her. Later in an interview, when he was describing this particular murder, he said when he had her body in the trunk of the car, he looked at her and he had a lot of pride. He said it was like a fisherman going out and catching a big fish and being proud of himself. What? So at this point, the police have named him the Coed killer. And police obviously are searching and trying to find him. And Ed, to increase his thrill, started hanging out in a bar called the Jury Room. The Jury Room was a cop bar that all the police officers, when they would get off work, would all go and hang out. So Ed started going there, and the cops all loved him. They would call him Big Ed. They would tell him all kinds of details about how they were searching for the Coed killer, and just, they really seemed to really like him. And even after he gets caught, the cops still seem to like him. Like, I don't quite understand. Somehow he could convince people to like him, even though they clearly know he's evil. Police, in an attempt to prevent more killings, they were telling college girls not to hitchhike and not to get into cars that weren't associated with the colleges that they were going to. But if you remember, Ed's mom works at the University of California. So she's got a parking tag hanging in her car. So people would still get into his car because they thought, oh, he's from the school, so he must be safe. Ed then went on in 1973 to kill 3 more college girls. He did the same things. He would cut them up, have sex with their dead bodies. And one of them, he took their severed head and buried it in a garden at his mother's house. And he positioned the head underground so that it was like facing up, looking at his mother's window. And Ed thought this was hilarious. He said his mother always wanted people looking up to her, and that's what he gave her. The truth was, Ed's mother was the target the whole time. He had killed his grandparents and 6 college girls, but who he really wanted to kill was his mother. That's who his anger, rage, and psychotic mind was focused on. He said the college girls represented what his mother would like or look up to or aspire to be like. He said that by killing these girls, he was destroying something his mother would have liked. His mother's abuse never stopped. So he's still living with his mother, and they're getting in horrific, horrible, vicious fights all the time. On the night of April 20th, 1973, he went up to his mother's bedroom. As soon as his mother saw him, she said, "Oh, I guess you're gonna want to stay up and talk all night." And Ed said no and left. But he came back once she was asleep because Ed did not want to stay up all night talking. He wanted to do what he had probably been dreaming of doing his entire life. In the middle of the night when his mother was sleeping, he took a claw hammer and bludgeoned his mother to death. He then chopped off her head and had oral sex with his mother's head. That is, I don't know. And this, to me, honestly, in true crime, is probably the most disturbing thing. He literally was having sex with his mother's decapitated head, and he was enjoying it. He then spent a bit of time throwing darts at the head. He then, for over an hour, sat the head down and screamed at it nonstop for over an hour. Like, I can't even picture something that insane. Like, there's a dead head and you've got some giant man screaming at it for over an hour. Like, of all serial killers, Ed Kemper has always been the one that I find most disturbing. I know a lot of people find a lot of other serial killers a lot more demented and psychotic than Ed Kemper, but for me, the whole situation with his mom's head is just honestly the most disturbing thing in true crime for me. Ed also cut out her tongue and her larynx to silence her, because I think his ultimate goal his whole life was to make his mother shut up. That is what he wanted his whole life. He just wanted his mother to shut up. So he took her tongue and her larynx. He tried to put it down the food disposal in the kitchen, and then it flew back out, and he again thought this was hilarious because he was saying, you know, she was a woman that could not be shut up. So I don't know. And then the next day, he called his mother's best friend and invited her over, and he killed her as well. And this was one of the killings that he never really explained that well, but he ended up stealing the best friend's car. And he said that if he wanted to create a cover story, he could always say that her mom and her best friend had gone on vacation together. So I think that might have been why he killed the mom's best friend. But he stole the mother's best friend's car and drove to Colorado. And Ed got to Colorado and he was expecting a spectacle. He thought the murder of his mother and her best friend would be all over the news. And I think he was kind of excited and hoping to see it all over the news. But he realized nobody had found the bodies. Nothing was on the news. Nobody knew what he had done. So then he called the police station where he knew the police officers, and he told the police officers what he had done, and they didn't believe him. They thought, Big Ed, there's no way he could have killed anyone. There's no way he could be the Coed killer. And then Ed started telling them things that only the Coed killer could know. And then they came to realize that they had been hanging out with and giving information about the investigation directly to the killer. When he was asked by police, why did you stop killing? Because he didn't get caught. He chose to stop killing. And he said that it didn't fulfill a physical or emotional need for him anymore. Okay. I think the whole purpose, I believe, behind all of these killings was he wanted to kill his mother. And I think once he killed his mother, he was done. Because serial killers normally don't stop killing. If they stop killing, it's because they got caught, or they die, or they're in jail for some other crime, or sometimes they'll have like a physical disability that prevents them there, or they're getting too old. But Ed just kind of could have kept killing if he wanted to. He just chose not to. And I think it was because he killed his mother, and that was his purpose the whole time. Ed was convicted of 8 counts of first-degree murder. And Ed asked for the death penalty. He also tried to unalive himself twice. But he was given 7 concurrent life sentences. Once he was in prison, he wanted to do interviews with everyone. Any news station, any police officer, the FBI interviewed him. Like, he loved giving interviews. And the thing about the interviews that's so weird is if you weren't actually saying the things that he was saying, he seemed almost like a normal guy. But if you've read the book Mindhunter, or I know there was a TV, I think it was on Netflix. Mindhunter was a book that was written by profiler in the FBI. And they also did a TV series about it. I think it was on Netflix. But Ed was actually credited as really helping the FBI to understand the mind of serial killers and to understand the way that they think. I mean, we don't want to give him credit for anything because he's disgusting, but it did end up helping the FBI with all the information that he had given them. Ed also was a model prisoner. He recorded over 5,000 hours of audiobooks. He did audiobooks for Star Trek, no, the other Star Wars, and Dune. I don't know what Dune is, but apparently it's popular. And the Star Wars books, I don't know. I don't know anything about those Star shows. But anyways, the point here is he did a lot of audiobooks. So if you're ever listening to an audiobook to fall asleep at night, a serial killer might be reading you your bedtime story. Maybe check who narrated the books before you listen to them. So as of right now, he's 73 years old. He's still in prison. The first time he came up for parole was in 1979. And sometimes he doesn't go to his parole hearings. Sometimes he does. The last time he tried to get parole was 2017. He was denied. They're never going to let him out of prison, but he will be up for parole again in 2024. Yeah, that is the psycho case of Ed Kemper. I hope you enjoyed the video, I guess is the best way to say. And I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who has been liking, commenting, subscribing. You guys, and I see all of you on Instagram sharing the video, and that has helped me so much to grow the channel, like introducing me to other people who like this weird shit that we do is absolutely amazing. I really appreciate you guys doing that. If you'd like to follow me on Instagram, it's abnormally_Carolyn. But if you're not into it, don't worry about it. Just keep watching the videos. I love it. You guys are amazing. I hope you have a wonderful day. Do something today that makes your soul happy, and I will see you in the next one.